Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM LP 103.3 in Asheville, this is The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian radio show broadcasting out of occupied Salagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world. This week we hear from Deja, the fiancé of incarcerated cop watcher Ramsey Orta. Ramsey has been in prison since 2016, and during his short time inside he's been transferred around a lot and spent over a year in isolation. Ramsey's name may be familiar as the police accountability activist who recorded the killing by police of the unarmed community member and grandfather Eric Garner in New York in 2014. Ramsey Orta's video went viral and drew NYPD harassment and attention to him and his family, and since his incarceration led to many threats by cop-sympathizing COs. Orta is currently about 90 days from his release date for his non-violent conviction and falls within the category of prisoners that New York is considering releasing before the pandemic is in full swing. If you can help lean on the powerful in New York to get Ramsey Orta released, you can email officialramseyorta@gmail.com or wecopwatch@gmail.com. You can learn more about Ramsey's case at ramseyorta.com or the Support Ramsey Orta Fedbook page, as well as wecopwatch.org or their Fedbook page. News just came in that Midstate Correctional, where Ramsey is currently being held, has shown its first infections of COVID-19, so this issue of securing Ramsey Orta's release is dire. He is being denied showers, soap, tissue, and enough food. Ramsey is also not being given cleaning supplies for his cell. A source for his mistreatment is a certain Sgt Mayo at Midstate. Supporters suggest phone numbers that we include in our show notes and that you can reach pretty easily, as well as email addresses to press officials in that state. Then we hear from two activists from Unemployed Humans Organizing Help, or Asheville, talking about tenant organizing for a rent freeze and pushing the government and hoteliers to open up those empty rooms to houseless folks in Asheville. More at their Fedbook page or by emailing uhohavl@riseup.net. Apologies for the sound in the second portion. Check out our podcast for a slightly longer edition and visit our website for bonus podcasts, including the recent release of Peter Gelderlos on the situation in Spain with autonomous organizing and words from Comrade Malik at USP Pollock in Louisiana. The Final Straw is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts. More info about CZN can be found at channelzeronetwork.com. And here's a jingle from another member of our network.
Hello, and welcome to We Will Remember Freedom, a monthly podcast of anarchist fiction. I'm your host, Margaret Killjoy. Hello, and welcome to Live Like the World is Dying, your podcast for what feels like the end times. I'm your host, Margaret Killjoy. Hello, and welcome to the jingle for both of my podcasts. I'm your host, Margaret Killjoy. You can find my podcasts wherever you get your podcasts or get them from the Channel Zero network.
But first, here are some words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain. Before that, though, here are some words from us about the following segment. Sean makes a comment around halfway through this piece, specifically about anti-Semitic currents among black male voters in the South. We at TFS think that there is an important discussion to be had here about how we think about bigotry as it intersects with race and class. The long and the short of it being that bigotry exists everywhere, but to all out say that X-black demographic always has Y bigotry is to uphold a logic that is embedded into anti-black racism and as such is the flip side of white exceptionalism. We do not agree with how Sean framed this point in this edition of You Are the Resistance, but based upon a conversation we had with him after the recording of this piece about this topic, we trust that he will be more careful in framing similar topics in future. If you would like to write to us about this piece, you can email us at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. And to write to Sean, stay tuned to the end of this piece for his full mailing address.
What you say, what you say, what you say, what? We're caught like a
I know it's hard these days to focus on anything unrelated to the current zombie apocalypse, so let's turn to another topic for just a moment and get out of that exhausting headspace. This past week, socialist Bernie Sanders suspended his campaign for president. This clears the path for Democrat Joe Biden to lose to Donald Trump in November. If this is deja vu all over again. You'll remember that in 2016, Bernie was seeking the Democratic nomination, competing against Hillary Clinton. Back then, the National Democratic Party had Bill Clinton cronies in key positions, and the National Party threw Bernie under the bus, stacking the deck against him. After the server was hacked, emails were later released that showed real collusion between the National Party and the Clinton campaign to get Bernie out of the way and secure the nomination for Hillary. The Democratic Party got exactly what it wanted, the candidate who didn't inspire anybody. I don't think anybody in America was inspired by Hillary Clinton. I don't think Hillary was excited about Hillary. Her campaign had a difficult time even explaining why anyone should vote for her. She was the political equivalent to a Lord of the Rings movie marathon, where after about 9 hours of hobbits and wizards, you find yourself secretly rooting for the orcs to slaughter everything just to get the shit over with. Trump, by the way, was the orcs. The orcs won. So, we fast forward, and 4 years later, the Democrats are again throwing socialist Bernie Sanders under the bus in favor of Joe Biden. You know, Biden. The guy Trump appropriately calls Sleepy Joe. The Joe Biden carrying the baggage of his then drug and alcohol-addicted son, taking a six-figure-a-year job with a corrupt foreign company in a scenario that just reeks of something fishy. The same Joe Biden that the Russians are now gearing up a full-court fear smear to destroy his reputation, his credibility, and his viability as a candidate. That guy. There are a number of political dynamics that have contributed to Bernie's political demise and Joe Biden's ascendance. Chief among those is the ability of the Biden campaign to garner the so-called black vote, particularly through the southern states. Generalities are always fraught with pitfalls, but it's accepted in political circles that the black male vote, particularly in southern states, trends more conservative, particularly on social issues. This favors Joe Biden, one of the most conservative Democratic candidates. Then you have the association between Barack Obama and Joe Biden, an association that Joe Biden is quick to reference all the time. He's always name-dropping his best buddy Barack. Never mind that Obama added Biden to the ticket back in 2008 to reassure non-black voters and conservatives who would otherwise not vote for Obama. In other words, Obama picked Biden as Veep, not because they were so similar, but because they were so diametrically opposite. A third dynamic that trended to Joe was anti-Semitism. Bernie is Jewish. There is traditionally in the Deep South, especially, a great distrust of the archetypal Jewish slumlord among the poorer black population. I suspect that to be one of the unspoken and perhaps unconscious reasons why Bernie Sanders never gained any traction with that voting demographic. So having come to an understanding of the why, let's talk about the what. What we now have is a middle-of-the-road social conservative in Joe Biden running against the most radical far-right neo-fascist to ever occupy the White House. That means the Dems have again selected yet another candidate running in the Hillary lane. You know, that unexciting tract of significantly unsexy highway where the scenery really sucks. It's the same political space already scorched by Bill Clinton, George W., John Kerry, Al Gore, and Hillary. All of those candidates but two have something in common. They're losers. Nobody has won by running in that lane since George W.'s first run for president. Even he abandoned that middle ground in his re-election bid. So that means Democrats are again dedicating themselves to a strategy and to a political orientation that hasn't had any success in the 21st century. Almost appropriate, I guess, since Joe Biden's politics are stuck in 1985. My point is that Democrats are addicted to failure. They're stuck in the scorched earth space that everyone else abandoned a long time ago, and they're shackling themselves to a septuagenarian with slurred speech, slowed reflexes, and diminishing capacities who has never ventured outside that scorched political space. So, some ifs. If coronavirus doesn't make November irrelevant, and if Trump doesn't declare martial law and encircle the White House with armed Marines, and if a porn star infected with coronavirus doesn't kiss Trump on the mouth and save the world, we can count on Trump's basket of deplorables to show up in full force, to crawl naked through broken glass to cast votes for their moron Messiah, while Sleepy Joe inspires pretty much nobody to show up in support of his agenda to rearrange the furniture. An agenda to rearrange the furniture, by the way, where he promises, of course, to not move anything too far too fast. The U.S. is no longer a two-party system. It's a one-party system at best. The Democrats no longer constitute a real party so much as a loose coalition united only by what they generally oppose. The Republican Party is also questionable as a party, given that its ostensible head is a non-ideological sociopath who's repugnant to most of its members. Hierarchical politics is falling apart, and unless coronavirus doesn't do the world a favor, it appears Trump will be in charge of this failed program until at least 2024. So, as I've said many times, if political violence is not the answer, you're asking the wrong question. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain, in exile from Ohio at Buckingham Correctional in Dillon, Virginia. If you're listening, you are the resistance.
You can write to Sean Swain at his latest address at Sean Swain, number 2015638, Buckingham Correctional, P.O. Box 430, Dillon, Virginia, 23936. You can find his past writings, recordings of his audio segments, and updates on his case at SeanSwain.org, or now follow him on Twitter at SwainRocks. So I'm speaking with Deja. Deja is a supporter of incarcerated cop watcher and political prisoner Ramsey Orta, and Deja is also Ramsey's fiance. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me, Deja.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about Ramsey's case and how he came to be incarcerated?
Well, Ramsey's case was built upon him taking a plea. His charges were the weapon charge, a gun charge, and a drug charge. He pled down because the attorney basically got him into saying, basically he took the charges for his mom. So instead of his mom and him going to jail, since she was on his case as well, he took, the whole charge on himself just to get a plea deal for his mom not to go to jail. So pretty much that's what happened with the case and the charges.
And people may recognize, and that's a pretty common thing for public defenders or whatever, or like lawyers, to just try to get people to just take charges. It's like people plea out all the time on things.
Exactly.
Which is how the system runs and gets so many bodies into bars. But people might recognize Ramsey's name. Can you talk a little bit about why people might, like what his heroic cop watching?
Well, Ramsey, that day, that fatal day that Eric Garner was killed, Ramsey wasn't a part of We Cop Watch during that time. He came to be a cop watcher after fellow member Jacob Crawford watched him and saw what he did and everything, and he kind of brought Ramsey onto the team, So prior to dealing with them, Ramsey had no kind of intellect on what people's rights were, if they can record, should they be recording, anything of that nature. So basically, Cop Watch was born after Ramsey shot the video. So as soon as he became one, Ramsey started going around and traveling to a few places around the world, other fellow cop watchers, and their intention was to record cops themselves, but also let other people know their rights and what they're able to do and not do, what the police have to give them information on if they ask for it. So being that there's so many different stipulations behind cops and them trying to scare you and them trying to tell you you can't do this, you can't do that, they're informants on things of that nature so people know that you can do this, no, you can't do that, but that civilians do have the right to be accommodated in a lot of ways. So that's pretty much how that works.
I used to do cop watch for about like 5 years when I lived on the West Coast. And I noticed that like the interactions that for the most part, like once police realized that you were there and you weren't going to back down, that you were videotaping what they were doing. And it wasn't just, at this point, they didn't have body cams, but it wasn't just like their car camera or whatever and whatever they wanted to edit or say in court. That a lot of times the police actually changed the way that they interacted with people, and it made situations safer, you know, for the people that were in contact with cops.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of go both ways, you know, so sometimes officers do take a stand back, like, okay, you know, they know what they can do, and, you know we can't fight this, we know we can't make a big issue on it because these are their rights. And then you have other officers who still in all are trying to contain people they're arresting and everything, but in the midst of that, still telling citizens, oh, back away, oh, you get back there, or, you know what I mean? So it's a catch-22, you know what I mean? And it's just like with these body cams and even with their car cams, as everybody knows, you know, that could be tweaked. It can be, oh, my camera didn't work, or my camera was broken, or anything of that sort. So they still have the advantage and the upper hand to still have control over these body cams. So I feel even with these rules set in place, it's still shady and underhanded things still going on around the world, as everybody else knows, I'm sure of. So, you know, these body cams and cameras, they're supposed to show interactions the way they actually went down. But if it doesn't go the way these officers wanted it to go down, they still, you know, can take and twist and use a different type of defense, you know, for why they did what they did.
And like the NYPD is one police force that's like renowned for holding grudges and going after people. And that's the reason that I used the term political prisoner for Ramsey, because this, like, the charges that he caught were very much seemed because he was already in the crosshairs of the police for videotaping Eric Garner's murder at their hands, which was a very embarrassing thing for them. And so a video just got put out on YouTube by Jacob Crawford, who's, again, a co-founder of We Cop Watch, where he talks about Ramsey's treatment while incarcerated. Can you talk about like his transfers and what they sometimes call diesel therapy, of like shipping someone from facility to facility and putting them in isolation in each of them? Because he's been in isolation for his time inside for over a year, right?
Right. From the minute Ramsey's foot touched down in Rikers Island where he started his bid at, he was getting into issues there, but it wasn't really so much as the COs at that point. Like, it wasn't a point there because Rikers Island operates totally different. Rikers is a totally different prison than different ones all around the world. And when Ramsey was there on his fateful day, everybody was going to lunch, receiving their lunches, and Ramsey and a couple of other of them noticed that, you know, the food looked or smelled weird, like it just didn't seem right. And right before Ramsey went to go eat his food, so like a couple of other inmates actually had already eaten and were distributing symptoms of like throwing up and stomach aches, diarrhea, things like that. And they came and, of course, they investigated it and I guess the different tests, and it wound up being rat poison, you know. So we felt that that's where his journey started at. His first issue started from the beginning. Now, as far as being transferred all around, what it is every time Ramsey goes to a different facility, the COs and everything, they tell him, like, we know who you are, we know what you did, and, you know, you did this to these police, so we're going to watch you now, things of that nature. And Ramsey's been giving all type of fictitious, tickets. They're basically putting lies on the tickets to fabricate the story. Basically, they're fabricating the story so that their story looks right, and Ramsey always looks bad in the situation. Because whenever you get an infraction, which is a ticket, and they tell you your charges, they say out what you didn't do, why they gave you this charge and everything like that. So you get the right to go to a hearing. And when you go to this hearing, you get the chance to plead your story, say your side, whatever it is. Ramsey has, and also grievances. Grievances are where you want to basically amend what happened. So if you didn't win your case, you can write a grievance stating like, okay, they did this, that, and the third, and that's why I didn't win, or they did this, and that's why I wasn't able to get the right consequences for this situation. So Ramsey always, of course, loses all the hearings. He has not won a hearing since he's been incarcerated. So that's what they do, and there's different options. They can give you loss of phone time. They can give you loss of rest time. You can be sent to solitary confinement. You can be confined to just your cubicle. It's different repercussions to whatever you got in trouble for. So Ramsey's different options have been all of those: confinement, loss of privileges, or, just being confined to his cubicle alone. And so he's dealt with them all. And as I said, they just write up fictitious things on these tickets. They embellish it, and so it looks worse on his part. And being that he gets tickets every facility he goes to, it most definitely looks good on them, because it's like, okay, you see every time this guy goes to the facility, he's in trouble. So everybody gets to see, all the COs and everybody, they get to see his whole rap sheet and everything that he's gotten charged with, everything that he's been in trouble with, everything. So that's their boost, I think, as well, to do what they want to do, because they have a paper trail of Ramsey and being in trouble so much. So it looks good on their side, you know what I mean? But yeah, he's gotten in trouble for minor things, as to his pants were too long, his hair wasn't braids. He was in somebody else's cubicle, because basically what they're saying is, I guess you're not supposed to socialize. Once again, you're not supposed to socialize with other inmates. So it's like, okay, do you expect me to sit here by myself all day and just, I'm already confined, I'm already in jail, I already have my life stricken away from me, basically, and you're trying to add on to those issues that I have already. And so he'll get, like I said, he'll get in trouble for things like, just being at somebody else's cubicle, talking to a fellow friend, or, they'll try to say he didn't obey orders because he stood up for himself and didn't just allow them to say whatever they wanted. So, Ramsey's been shipped around so many times, I'm losing count, to be honest. And as you said, he's been in solitary confinement for up to a year's time, and he still has about 90 days left. So this, of course, we feel is not even over yet, and so he's had to deal with a lot, but what's going on now with this coronavirus is a whole different type of situation where they're on the dire, issue. There's this crucial right now, this corona epidemic, and still in all, they aren't treated the right way they're supposed to, even with this happening, even with this going on. So the mistreatment, the targeting, all of that, this coronavirus supersedes all of that, and so that's what he was just dealing with at Midstate, so that's the current condition of that.
When you said 90 days more, you meant left in his sentence until he gets released, right?
Right. He comes out in July, yeah.
So
that's what I meant, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of the corona and his personal sanitary needs, soaps and stuff like that, and his attempt to create his own personal protective equipment out of a towel and getting punished for that. Can you talk about that stuff?
So just recently, a couple of days ago, not even 3 days ago, Ramsey called me and he told me how they weren't giving, well, first it started out with just him because he was back in solitary. He was in solitary when this happened, before this happened and everything. So in the beginning, it started off with them not giving him just personal needs, as in shower, tissue, soap. All he had in his cell was just a cot and himself. So that's where it started at. Now, it, of course, in the coming days, wound up getting more intense because first Ramsey said to me that they were saying, I guess, I don't know who, but that they weren't being quarantined. So basically, I guess that they were okay, everything was fine. Then he heard from another person, like all of this is word of mouth, but he's hearing from different people. So then he hears from another person saying that they are being quarantined. So, of course, you know, his feelings and everything, like everything just got heightened because if you're telling me, if I'm not sure what's going on with this facility and I'm in this facility, you're putting me at risk of anything, you know, well, all of them at risk of anything. So first it was that they didn't even let them know what was going on and if anybody was sick and anything of that nature. So it went from that to now people know that it's been a few inmates now that have died from the coronavirus, you know, being incarcerated. So, of course, all of the inmates are a wreck because this is not a situation to take lightly. So now you have all these inmates, you know, basically scared, you know, their minds going everywhere. They're not being told anything. They're kept in isolation on top of being in isolation. You know, it's crazy. So Ramsey told me, like, you know, they're not giving us cleaning supplies to clean everything down with. And you have to understand, they're all in close proximity to each other. So, of course, they can't practice social distancing. They can't practice not touching and being around each other. None of that can happen. So if one of them inmates contract the coronavirus, you already know how that's going to end. So these inmates, as I said, they're worried, you know. So he told me that they weren't giving them any type of sanitary products. They weren't giving them masks. They weren't giving them gloves. But he told me that they were wearing gloves and masks. So they were prepared to protect each other, but you guys aren't prepared to protect the inmate. So this, at the moment, which was going on just like the day before yesterday, 2 days ago, you know, it's been going on for a few days now, probably up to a week or two or so since it started. So also, Ramsey was saying that he had to share a food tray with a bunkie because they weren't even giving them the proper portions of food. Ramsey also told me that they had given them a apple juice to drink that was expiration was dated about 9 years ago. And
why do they even have that still?
That's what the question was, because it's like, how do you even have possession of apple juices that were, you know, dated out to 9 years? We're not talking about the year before. We're not 9 years. Like, can you understand? So it's just like, how did that happen? That's the question that's just the only question, how, you know? So that's what's going on, and it's sad, you know, it's sad and it's sickening, especially at these times that these inmates, like, have no choice, you know what I mean? And it's a big thing going on because as of lately, of course, I'm pretty sure everybody's heard that it's certain stipulations that are happening now with the jails where they're supposed to be releasing a certain amount of inmates because of the coronavirus. The different stipulations that I've heard that's supposed to be happening is if the inmate has 90 or less days left in their sentence, or if the inmate has a non-violent charge. And Ramsey meets the criteria for both things. So ever since we heard about this, we're just really on, like, high alert, like, okay, what do we need to do? Who do we need to speak to? How can we get Ramsey out of there if there's anything we can do, anybody we can reach out to, anybody that has like a good pull on the justice systems, good lawyers that can represent him to make a case for him, that back up that he meets the criteria and he should be home and things of that nature. So our minds are just running wild with that at the moment. So that's the main goal for us. So we're online and we're all over Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. As you stated, Ramsey Crawford produced a video speaking about a lot, and we make day-to-day post updates so everybody knows what's going on with Ramsey at all times. And, of course, I keep in contact with him all the time, as much as possible. So, I'm the vessel, and then I reach out to Jacob, and he does all of the Facebooks and all of the social media that, gets put out there to let people know the conditions Ramsey is under. So that's what happens. We're just doing our best right now to try to figure out if he can, be let out, if he can just come home. As I said, he has about 90 days left anyway, so it's just like, why not let him out? He doesn't have a year, 2, 6 months. It's less than 5 months this man has left. So why even still hold him other than the fact that you guys are just trying to further just punish him even more, So it's like, I understand his bid isn't finished, but at the same time, it's like, we're knocking on that door. So why just not open it and end this already?
So if somebody has access to, or somebody is a lawyer who's interested in getting involved with this, or who has media contacts, you said that y'all are both all over the internet. What are some good places for people to look to try to contact you to get in touch if they have help that they can offer?
To support Ramsey page on Facebook, that's exactly what it states, is to support Ramsey Orta page. Jacob also put, if I'm not mistaken, he put Ramsey's up-to-date statuses on the Week Hot Watch page as well. As far as being the best way to be in contact with me is through Ramsey's email, which is officialramseyorta@gmail.com. No spaces. It doesn't matter about, lowercase, uppercase. It's just officialramseyorta@gmail.com. And that's where I get and receive all the emails. They come straight to my phone. As people know, I respond to each and every person that does email me about anything, concerning Ramsey. So I'm very diligent with that. So I'm always getting emails and I'm always responding. So I want people to know that it's not a thing where I won't get back to you, or it's a long wait to get in touch with me, because as I said, I respond promptly. So that's the main way to be in direct contact with me, which is the best way to let me know, firsthand that, okay, Deja, we can do this, we can do that, or we know people who might be able to do this and do that, and I follow up on that as much as I can, so.
And if any listeners are personal friends with Governor Cuomo, this is a good time to nudge him and be like, hey, free Ramsey, free all the other prisoners. This is a very dangerous situation that you're putting these people in. This affects all of their families. This affects whole communities. It's time to get off your ass and do this.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. I'm hoping, because we even have basically a website up to reach Cuomo specifically and personally, to try to, get him in on a situation and get him to broaden his horizon over who actually is able to get out. What supposed to be 1,000 inmates that are supposed to be released is what I've heard last. I don't know how he's going about these 1,000 released inmates thing. I know also in the stipulations, there also people they're looking at who have health issues as well. So I just believe that ultimately, if somebody has a health issue, a critical health issue, and they do have not so much time left and everything, because don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sit here and say I think people who don't have 9 days or less shouldn't be released, but as they stated, if they have nonviolent charges and 90 days or less. I do believe that, especially if they have a health condition, that they should be on the front line. It's sad that, of course, everybody in the world can't be released. And I understand the stipulations of the nonviolent charges because I get it. I mean, of course, you don't want people who have killed or, raped or, anything of that sort. I'm not going to say I think they should just die and be sick. I mean, of course, you should take the necessary precautions so they don't get sick. But I just feel like if you're in the circle of being let off for 90 days or less, or, nonviolent charges, or especially if you meet both criteria, most definitely you should, and especially if you reach being sick, being 90 days or less, and the nonviolent charge, you immediately should be released. So those are the things that I just want all of these people who have a platform, and if we can get to Cuomo, if we can get to somebody that just has ties with him, if we can get any outlet anywhere near to him, we need that. We need that, and we need it as soon as possible because the epidemic is taking over the world, literally. So it's just, why not, And as you said, do something. Let's go, Cuomo. Let's go. Anybody who can help in a big way, that has a big name, help. Please help. Please help all of us. Please help people that are just ready to get out of there. Just get them out of there now. Make sure they're safe. Make sure there's no reason for their health to be put more so at risk than it is already. That's what everybody wants and what we should demand. It's a demand now. Let them out. Make sure they're out, and if not, we're going to keep on pushing and publicizing and doing everything we can to make sure somebody's going to hear it. And it's like, it falls on you guys. It falls on Cuomo. People are dying, and, these inmates that have 90 days or less and everything that are still being cooped up in there, their lives, their blood is on your hands, literally. This needs to happen. This is no more of an asking. This is a telling. And if you don't, we're going to keep on, probing until we get some kind of result that we want and we need. That's pretty much how I feel,
Well, Deja, thank you so much for having this chat, and good luck. So much solidarity and respect to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate you being another outlet for me to speak to the world and let everybody know about Ramsey and everything he's endured and everything that's going on now, and why we need, for him to come home and be home even more so. So I appreciate the time and you allowing me to be on this station, to speak my piece and speak for Ramsey, because that's what I'm here for. So I appreciate that.
Now we're going to hear Lee Reed with his track The Sixth Massive from his 2018 album Before and Aftermath.
Welcome to the sixth mass extinction.
Before collapse, before the rapture, before bits of bricks and broken glasses, before scores of storms flatten us, habitats dried up and cracked. After NAFTA, the disastrous supranational trade pact and unfettered access to capital. Before the crash that ended crashes. After the green light on greed, governments governing by agreement. Design signed by the company chief, by and for corporate supersede. Override the needs of life before we die, cause they sign it. The sky cracked and society took 2 gigantic steps backwards. After the passage of Trade Act, enacted and activated aftermath. After apathy, carved path through green pasture. After fascists, after Keynesian market strategists built the patterns that killed the planet. After knowing, but as it manifests, big business gets a grab at it. After the new management, after aftermath, it got added in. Subtraction, resource extraction. After markets are made the master. Before collapse, before the rapture, before the bricks and the glass. After sovereignty's put to pasture and the earth tapped of its vastness, until the last of it mapped and stacked on charts and graphs. Add that to the tab, the before and aftermath. Yeah, you can add that to the tab. You can add.
Apologies for the sound quality in this second portion. Would you all care to introduce yourselves with whatever names, pronouns, and affiliations you'd like to share?
My name is Sadie O'Brien, and I'm one of the moderators for Asheville Solidarity Network, or SOLNET. And I've been involved with Unemployed Humans Organizing Help.
I'm Scott, they, them, and I'm organizing with Unemployed Humans Organizing Help.
When I think about mutual aid these days, I'm often thinking about like community coming together to source and distribute goods and maybe help each other repair houses, like what you see after hurricanes or earthquakes or fires or whatever. Could you all talk about tenant organizing in the framework of mutual aid?
Basically, it just kind of seemed like the next thing to do for us, because we were starting to try to put a lot of information through Asheville SOLNET, trying to make sure people were up to date on things about, like whether they could get evicted or whether their water could get shut off. And very quickly, like some of the core organizers started getting in notices from folks in the area about needing things like water and food and basic medical supplies. That's basically like how it got started. It just sort of snowballed from there.
I would also say, clearly we're in the middle of a disaster, so mutual aid disaster relief kind of processing makes sense, but a lot of the work that people do in the face of disaster are things that we hope to see continued beyond that immediate context. And so it doesn't always have to do with rentals and tenants, but this situation has created this context in which people are being asked not to work and still being expected to pay their bills. So it's a place where we need solidarity to help keep tenants safe and sheltered as much as possible, and also have solidarity with the people who don't have houses to shelter them.
I was just going to add that one of the reasons why tenant organizing has been what's been happening is because there's been several labor organizing campaigns here in Asheville, and a lot of local folks, especially younger radical folks, who are very interested in these kinds of campaigns, but we haven't really had a lot of successes. I say we, even though I've only been here about a year. It's the kind of thing where we find ourselves we're all tenants. We're suddenly without jobs. So many of us, half the city or something like that. So we are certainly all in the same housing situation, more or less, at least critical mass of us.
Yeah, and building off that, I think this current situation is creating a kind of understanding of the contradictions of that we live within, where a lot of people take it for granted that they have to pay rent to a landlord to live in a place, but when suddenly you are forced not to work or laid off, or your hours are reduced, or going to work is putting your health and safety on the line, it puts into a different light the expectation that you pay these people who don't have to do that, or are just sitting back and taking the money and extracting these resources from you. So it's a place, I don't know, this current crisis has made housing and being a tenant a specific location for joining in mutual aid efforts.
Can you talk a little bit about what the housing situation is like in Asheville? This last week we had a chance to air a conversation with David Forbes, who writes about this sort of stuff for the Asheville Blade. And I think for listeners, some listeners will be surprised at what this little mountain town offers in terms of price ranges and availability of housing units. But it also might sound really similar to folks in Barcelona or the Bay Area, or even smaller touristy cities in different parts of the world.
I lived here 4 years, I guess, and it's funny how much it's changed within the amount of time that I've been here. It was already pretty well into gentrification when I came here, but it's this town that is in western North Carolina. It's not a big town. I think when I moved here, it was 80,000 people within the larger area. It had always been a kind of touristy spot, like a hippie enclave within a pretty conservative rural area. But because of like breweries and the outdoor stuff, it's just become like a place where people come to buy second homes. And then with Airbnb, that's just kind of like been a huge development where I think like some outrageous percentage of housing in Asheville is dedicated to Airbnb. So over the number of years I've been here, it's become harder and harder to afford to live here. There's also no jobs except in the service industry for the most part. So it's just a really hard place to live, but it's also a place that offers a lot of things to certain people. Like we have a very strong queer and trans community here. So people who come from the Southeast region looking for a certain measure of safety, it can offer that. And the other thing I would say is that racially, Asheville is like a really intense place. There's like studies over this, but over the last couple of decades, the Black population of Asheville has significantly reduced. It's a incredibly segregated city where most of the Black population live in public housing, and the police force, but it got an influx of money to up the policing in the wake of murdering a Black man in a public housing parking lot. They heavily police the Black population and the houseless population here.
As somebody who moved here at the beginning of May 2019, I haven't seen a lot of things change, but I have been lucky in that I've been able to be here at a time when a lot of local like leftists and anarchists and, as Scott mentioned, queer and trans folks have created like a fairly strong nucleus of mutual support network, and we're seeing it really blossom, to mix my metaphors, into something that's really working for a lot more people than it was originally designed to do. And I think we're scaling up pretty well. Like what we're basically seeing is like here in Asheville, like Scott said, you have a service industry job or you're independently wealthy. I'm sitting in my home right now looking out my bedroom window, and I can actually see one of the Airbnbs in my neighborhood from here. Like it's not marked or anything, but I found it on Google Maps one day. And it's the kind of thing where you're like, you gotta wonder, you want to go over and knock on their door and be like, so are you guys still posting this room or what? And if so, I kind of want to tell all my friends so they can come do a noise demo outside your house. So we'll see what comes of it, you know? But it's like, it's so real.
Within the current situation of the shelter in place that's been ordered, like not only as law enforcement nationally, but also within the state, gotten a bunch of money. And I've been hearing tell through channels that police have been enforcing curfews in certain neighborhoods, including around public housing and to houseless communities in the downtown area. Can you all say anything to this? I don't know if you can speak to it or not.
One of the first things that happened that made the town look different as we started to adapt to the virus being at pandemic levels, suddenly all the folks that had been like panhandling on street corners or on highway entrances were gone, like just not there at all. And there's always a lot of travelers, especially in the warmer months here in Asheville. So between the very like brazen signage that the Asheville PD has used to indicate like it's a crime to be within 6 feet of each other, guys, and being very selective about where they post this kind of thing, there's a huge obvious disconnect going on, and there's concern about what's going to happen to the houseless population, like if they're going to be forced into shelters and then if they're going to receive any care.
Yeah, one of the major contradictions of this like city is that they build all these hotels for the tourists that are standing empty right now because no one's traveling, and there's people on the streets who are being heavily policed and in their like lives are criminalized, and they don't have the things that they need to be able to keep safe during the pandemic. So that's another front that we kind of want to push on, is like opening these like unused luxurious spaces for people who actually need them.
Yeah, do you want to talk further about that?
I know that the Asheville Tourism Board takes in a lot of money and has a lot of sway in the city when the city council, and whenever anyone kind of raises a question about what they're doing, they really raise a stink, talking about how much money they put into the town and how many jobs they create, which is obviously a load of garbage. But I would say also I wanted to add just something that about the kind of selective policing. We saw reports of flyering going on within public housing areas of like enforcing the 6 feet distancing of social distancing with a potential misdemeanor, which these kinds of flyers aren't going around in like other neighborhoods.
Right.
So people's behavior during this pandemic are being policed in specific obvious locations where they aren't elsewhere.
But very clearly along the lines of race and class, as you know, as you'll find anywhere else, despite the fact that like Asheville presents itself as a progressive Disneyland in the mountains, whatever.
I mean, but that's the thing. Like, Disney World has no Jews. So, of course, a Disneyland in the Smoky Mountains would have no visible people of color, because, like, that's the progressive fakeness just leaking in. Like, they really just want the appearance of it when they can pull it out, and that's it. They don't really give a shit. Like, you have the same problem other places I've lived, too, like Northern Virginia and D.C. and Northern California.
Yeah, I used to teach college in the area, and people would talk about how, like, diverse Asheville is, and then if you, like, push them on it, they just mean liberal. They didn't actually mean that it wasn't a white majority. But and also the other thing in terms of this, like, you know, like tourist destination Disneyland place, during the pandemic, we've seen over the last year that the big hospital in town has been bought out by a corporate entity. The care that they've offered has deteriorated, and their treatment of the people working there has deteriorated. So there's been a lot of organizing among the nurses there to try and get better working conditions, specifically during this pandemic. But I've heard that even rich people had stopped considering moving to Asheville because they heard how bad the hospital has become over the last year. So that's just like another factor of what we're living in. All the money goes into attracting more money to make more breweries, but not to actually make anything for the people who live here and are barely scraping by.
So I wonder if one of y'all would want to talk about what Uh-Oh is, like where it came up and sort of who makes up the current organizing body of it.
So it started out with the core organizers from the Asheville Soulnet, who then started reaching out to people who had started organizing on their own or who had done good work before and should be connected with a larger movement. And so we just kind of went from there. Like our friend and comrade Tilda came up with the name Uh-Oh. And I think that it was really kind of a great idea because, you know, Ashevilleans appreciate a certain bit of whimsy, and especially at a time like this, it's important, I think, to still be able to have a little bit of a sense of humor. Like, we're not really a lighthearted bunch in our Facebook group for Uh-Oh. Like, we're talking about pretty serious things, like how to contact landlords and, you know, bargain with them and stuff like that. But we're trying to just, like, keep a little bit of a hint of, like, hey, everything's going to be okay. We're here for each other. Don't get too down and negative and serious.
The way I've seen it, because I like joined up with the work that I was doing a little bit later, it became like a sort of place for people who rent in Asheville and were facing the April 1 due date for their rent, being like, what am I supposed to do? I don't have money. It's either rent or food for the next month, or I've like tried reaching out to my landlord and got this response. So people were going to this place to try and find others to talk to. And so I sort of jumped in to try and help getting people connected with each other around issues like around shared like buildings or shared property management or shared landlords, and just get the conversations going so no one was having to face this stuff alone.
And how's that been going? Like how receptive have tenants been? Have you gotten pushback from property managers? And how have you responded to that?
On the one hand, like on the good side of things, we now have between 3 Facebook pages, like more than, I would say close to 4,000 people following. And this kind of came out of nowhere. Like this is at least 1,000 more people than either Soulnet or Asheville Survival Program had a couple of weeks ago. And we've been able to already attract a couple of hundred people into the Uh-Oh discussion groups, even though it's a private Facebook group and you have to like get, you know, like, what do you call it? You answer questions and then a moderator lets you in. Because we're just trying to make sure that people are at least not obvious landlord plants or what have you, to try to attempt to have some modicum of security and reliability within the group.
The feeling I have mostly from talking to people is fear. It's like the general fear of the pandemic, but the fear of like how they're supposed to like pay their bills and make it through. It's been difficult to do this kind of work, which usually relies a lot on in-person contact and meeting, like going around to tenants and having conversations. I've been basically approaching people being like, are you worried about rent? Let's like talk about it, and hearing where they're at. And what this context offers that's like a little bit different is that it's a little bit easier to get to the like more radical position of like this landlord's just, you know, taking what I need from me, because there's not a lot of options for these people to get money elsewhere. But having to do it all through social distancing online platforms is definitely a little bit hard getting ways to get people to continue conversations. Yeah, so like moving from like chat groups to signal groups to having like Jitsi meetings, and it makes a difference when you can see people's face and hear their voice, I've found. And that, I think, gains a little bit of reassurance, just that like there's like a person over there that's also dealing with this.
I just wanted to kind of say somewhat lightheartedly that there's been so many new methods of organizing electronically, thanks to like Silicon Valley style neoliberalism. So we may be more, isolated from each other than ever, but we have so many ways to stay in touch with each other. And I mean, as somebody who's used the Signal app a lot for sensitive communications and stuff, it's not fun to use encryption software. It's not enjoyable or aesthetically pleasing. And eventually you get really cranky with people. I know I do, because like it's stressful to stare at a tiny screen and read like, dozens of messages. So like we know we're asking a lot of people to, in terms of trying new things and getting used to using new kinds of approaches to like communicating and reaching out to other people. But I think we're starting to see people forming networks of their own, and that's really great.
The way that like we've been approaching it that's like really working well to get people to connect is just sharing the story of what's happening and what are we going to do. We're not imposing on anyone like, you have to act this way to be organizing with us. Mostly we're just offering a form of solidarity and some possible collective action, but like giving people a place to connect around this like really important issue is like, I think has helped with people.
I feel like in our society, people who can afford to, even people who can't afford to, I guess you could argue that none of us could afford to, except for the 1% or whatever, try to just hunker down and weather the storm when our ability to have very basic survival needs is in danger. So it's amazing to hear that people are actually connecting to each other and at least discussing with people they maybe didn't know before the possibility of sharing the burden of refusing to pay rent. Can we talk really briefly about as far as we know, what the legal repercussions are? Like, are evictions being enacted in Buncombe County, and is there support for landlords? These are like two things that'll be claimed as like, we can't organize because we get evicted, and landlords saying, if you don't pay your rent, I am going to lose my building to the bank.
First of all, I mean, on the national and state level, we're seeing a lot of interest from legislators in making sure that quote-unquote mortgage holders, see how they did that, are protected, and they only more reluctantly talk about people who rent. So, most of us, landlords will be taken care of to some extent. Like, not every single person who collects rent on a property they own, but certainly like rental property corporations, property management corporations are going to be fine. So really what we're doing is we're seeing how they'll take care of each other, and we have to take care of ourselves because they really aren't going to. It's like a little preview of like what's down the road with climate change stuff and the 1%. We're seeing, like, I'm a landscaper, and overnight I saw all my clients just sort of shrivel up because suddenly they were like, oh, I'm good. My lawn's fine. Yeah, I know what's outside, but I just don't want you here. And I'm like, okay, are you guys mentally preparing yourself for the purge? What's happening here? It's hot,
And then in terms of like evictions, initially they said there was going to be like a halt on evictions till, I think it was April 15th. It just got extended to June 1st. What that turns out to mean is that civil court is not operating. I think that landlords can technically still put in eviction, and it would be possible, I guess, that the case could be heard, but for the most part it'll be delayed till after June 1st. So eviction proceedings can be started at this time, it seems like, but they wouldn't be handled until after June 1st, and that could potentially be extended. That doesn't stop landlords from still doing illegal stuff, like what they call self-help evictions. So we've seen landlord notes saying, if you don't pay rent by the 5th, I'm going to send you a 10-day eviction notice, which isn't a thing, right? You have 30 days, and it has to go through court.
Right.
So we're predicting also that people not paying rent might get harassed by their landlords in an quote unquote illegal way. The courts aren't going to help either side at this point unless there's criminal stuff, and the police also aren't going to help, obviously. So there's like a little bit of a standstill there, but the landlords have the upper hand insofar as people are afraid, and they can use that fear. I've also seen landlords do this thing, like I'll just use my landlord, for example. First communication was about losing all the income due to the pandemic was responded to with a form, intrusive financial questions, and asking like how many credit cards we've taken out, how many like loans we've considered taking out to pay our rent. And then the next step was to send a contract saying, I'll pay you half on the first and half when I get my stimulus check. So basically the landlord's like, that stimulus check is for me. So they're doing a lot of like weird messed up stuff to try. I think it's a sign that the landlords are afraid and they know that people are in this position that is going to go against them, but they're trying to use their like stature in our normal world pre-COVID to instill fear in the renters, because no one wants to consider right now being out on the street, and that's enough to make people say, I can't afford to eat this month, I'll pay my rent.
So I mean, I guess what it's designed for or not. The stimulus check that we're talking about is like the $1,200 to $1,600 that I guess every adult with documentation in the U.S. is supposed to be able to receive. I haven't heard a timeline as to if and when that's actually going to happen.
Well, someone I heard said if they wanted to use that money to pay landlords, they would send that money to landlords, right? Like, that's one way to think about it. Obviously, they're putting more money into banks, more money into airlines, and like a pittance into people, because like $1,200 isn't enough to live off of. You know, depending where you live, it's like nothing, you know? But it definitely wasn't earmarked for landlords. They could just have a landlord bill.
Yeah.
Which it sounds like they might, actually. Yeah, it's actually kind of fascinating. So something that I learned recently is that the IRS, on paper, wants you to record things like handing a $10 bill to the kid down the street for cutting your lawn. Now, the reason I mention this is because at this point, I feel as though landlords have suddenly become even more concerned than the IRS about our personal finances. And they're like, oh, hey, I'm going to need everything so that I can make sure I'm in the advantage here. And it's like pretty despicable. Like when I call my landlord, you know, this is a shell corporation for a local marble and tile company, right? Lighthouses LLC. He said, oh yeah, you might be able to pay half on the first and half later in the month. Let me talk to my partner. And he got back to me like 6 hours later with like, yeah, I guess that's okay. I'm like, buddy, I told you like half of the people in my household are out of work. So like that's the maximum you're going to get is half.
A lot of management companies own property in Asheville, so they'll do this thing where they're like, I'll work with the owner of the house with you and I'll get back to you, and then they come back and they're like, oh, sorry, the owner won't help. There's no recorded conversation that we have access to when whatever that means, like they talk to the owner. Some of the owners own the property outright, so it's just money making for them, right? It's not like they're meeting their mortgage. That's the argument that a lot of property owners will make, is like, if you don't pay my rent, I can't pay my mortgage. So there are mortgage deferment plans being enacted now for certain people, so that can also be a little bit of BS. And just maybe just to like give you a little idea of like the state of like where we are in our organizing, we as have drafted a collective letter that's been signed on to by multiple tenant groups and multiple groups in town. And if you wanted to, I could like give you the full text of the letter, but the gist of it is that we're demanding a rent freeze, sending it to landlords as well as city, county, and state officials, using the argument basically that because of the pandemic, people shouldn't be expected to pay rent because we can't work.
Yeah, we've had the slogan, no jobs means no rent.
It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I think like we've been specifically, as of now, using the word freeze as we're building our organizing, because I think rent strike has a certain kind of understanding with it. And you know, like May 1st is coming up. There's a lot of history in May 1st, and that has to do with striking, and that's like an aspiration. But like the main thing, the rental organizing, the tenant organizing that we're doing is like not paying. We shouldn't be expected to pay rent. It shouldn't be gathering interest. You shouldn't be accruing fees. It shouldn't be like 3 months of no paying rent and then you owe 3 months all of a sudden after not working. Just no one should be paying rent for the time of this crisis, or ever, is what I believe. But
yeah, the city of Asheville, for folks listening who don't know, handles water and sewage for residents, and then the company Duke Energy handles electricity. Now, Duke Energy made a point of saying that they were not going to turn off anybody's electricity during this crisis, but like as Scott alluded to earlier, that doesn't mean that they're not going to keep charging you, like racking up a total of what you owe them, or quote unquote owe them. And it really, like, one of the things we've been talking a lot about this conversation is like the contradictions that are on display, and it's like, you know, this is a great time to go up to somebody who's struggling to pay their rent and saying, you know, isn't it messed up that we have to pay for stuff like water and lights? And like, I mean, if sometimes landlords roll utilities into the cost of rent. Well, then, like, obviously it's not life and death that we pay extra on top of that.
Yeah, so I'd like to hear about what sort of like opportunities, like we've sort of alluded to some of the disadvantages of trying to organize something right now, and I'd love to hear more about like the difficulties of doing that sort of work and the sort of stress, because it's definitely the lack of face-to-face interactions. But I think having a point of commonality with a lot of people, like y'all need somewhere to live, right? Y'all can't afford to pay for something to live. Like creating that sort of commonality creates an interesting like class understanding that usually falls away in day-to-day capitalist living in America. We have suddenly a lot more in common with the person down the street who's houseless, who we can see ourselves becoming in the next couple of weeks if we can't pay rent and get evicted, along with maybe the person that owns their own house and maybe won't be able to pay their personal mortgage and doesn't make money off of renting to other people, or the small family, and also with the tenants in some like apartment building. Can you talk about like some of those conversations that you've had and how they've gone?
Yeah, well, we've been having those conversations throughout, for one thing, because like Scott and I were saying earlier, it's just really tough to have to stare at a screen and that be. It's like either you stare at your screen for your like messaging app all day, or you try to like finagle conference calls with people, sometimes video calls and stuff like that. And even though that can be a little more personal, that also brings with it additional technological issues. Not everybody's phone is as good at doing things like video chatting as others, that kind of thing. But on the other hand, this might sound strange, but because so many of us are not working right now, there's so much other stuff we're doing. Like some of the conversations we've been having in the uh-oh boards include topics like, just asking how people are doing, or asking like, so what skills are you honing or realizing you have now that there's this pandemic going on? Like me personally, just in the last couple months, I went from like having a casual interest in gardening to being like a landscaper, and now I'm running seeds up and down Buncombe County to people who are trying to plant. And I ran down to South Carolina on a supply run to some houseless folks camping who are connected to some Asheville social circles. It's wild seeing the people suddenly become like, not to be overblown here, but like suddenly taking on these very quietly heroic roles where they're like, oh yeah, we delivered 500 meals today, or things like that. The limitations are very frustrating, but because of the other side of us having to practice social distancing, some people anyway, are like finding ways to flourish or even thrive in ways that they can't when they have to work full time.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's like plugging people into organizing. Like I'm used to this at this point, but like, hearing all the memes of people being like social distancing, I'm so bored, and are like doing all this like creative art and stuff. I'm like, I'm just working my normal unpaid full-time job of organizing all the time and having meetings constantly. But now they're like online and a little bit more frustrating and tedious. But on the other hand, it's interesting. Like you hear people saying like people with like right-wing families or whatever being like, all my family is now making these like socialist demands because of the situation the pandemic has created. I like to think like I use the word anarchism to describe my relation to the world and the way that I want it to be. But I also think that I don't hold that word wholly, and I think that people find themselves doing anarchism in all these little ways. And this is another situation where it just becomes very clear, like bills and rent right now are ridiculous. The fact that we're expected to do that is ridiculous. Work is ridiculous. Like we don't need to work the way that we're expected to, the way that we're forced to. We don't need to do all these things. And people are seeing that. Just like in any disaster, people start doing what I would call anarchism in mutual aid, because that's what we do. We like take care of each other, right? Like that's what we want to see, is like everyone in our vicinity, in our areas, like being able to survive and do well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's literally the basis of our own strength to be able to put ideas out there and engage them, or just like not even ideas, but simple things like living in a space, are directly related to other people's ability to do that. If everybody is doing this thing, or a large number of people are all saying, we're just not going to pay rent, fuck off, we don't have the money, and it's utterly inhuman for us to try to force us to do this right now. If enough people share that common mindset, allows all of us to do that and shift the Overton window.
Just like because I've had some arguments with friends around this, and I would just like want to bring it up, like using a crisis where like a huge number of people are going to die as like an opportunity. There's like, I don't want to frame it just as this like positive opportunity for anarchism to show like its strength, right? Because like there's a lot of horror going on with this, and we have to be really wary of the way that the state frames this. Like social distancing is important in order to stop the spread, but it also can be used to further isolate us and individualize us, and it also obviously can be used to excuse more totalitarian measures in policing. So we have to fight against all this stuff, even though it is also providing like a kind of clear slap in the face that like a lot of this stuff is ridiculous. But like I want to particularly fight about like the fear of like people, like walking down the street and like being afraid of everyone because everyone could be like infected. And I don't know, there's a lot of, we've been trained to feel that way from zombie movies already,
Yeah. I want to piggyback onto what Scott was talking about. Basically, like, even though I just gave a moderately glowing review of life under the pandemic, like, wow, look at all these opportunities. The backdrop to that is that I've had to start using my anxiety meds more than I have in months. And I started having stress nightmares again for the first time in years. So, like, I think one of the best ways to kind of, like, think about it is when things become much more clear politically about how things really work and how little we're actually valued by the 1%, it comes at, like as Scott was talking about, it comes at an enormous trade-off in our personal well-being. So we have to see it as an opportunity as well as everything else, but not act opportunistically. We need to pounce while the situation presents us with such a moment. I've heard people joking around about, we're making references to the author Naomi Klein, who talked about disaster capitalism, and people are saying what we need is to counter it with disaster socialism. Like, we have to hit them hard and fast and suddenly have all this mutual aid everywhere before they can, lock us into some sort of Yang Gang style government check plan. We become like fundamentally dependent upon the state again, rather than being able to actually move away from that kind of dependence on a centralized national authority.
Right. That was so well said. And like, that's why I think like when people say what we have basically is already a general strike, or like rent strike is going to happen because no one can pay rent, we need to like, we can't just sit and like take that as is. We have to do that. We have to like make that happen in a very particular way.
And I think making that happen in a particular way has to include like what you've both been saying. Like, it's not to just opportunistically take space, although I think that is just kind of, the nature of power. But I think that like it's important for anti-capitalists and especially anti-authoritarians at this point to say it's not just that we want some alternative, it's that what we have is not only like allowing people to fall through the cracks, it's throwing people down the storm drain, and that's how it continues to stay in power. Like, there's all these people that we don't have public health care, so there's all these people that are always dying from health crisis, and some of that is because of like racialization or because of transphobia or the constant stresses that are occurring or not having documentation. There's all of these elements in how the normal existence of the system is a crisis for people, and what we're seeing right now are the cracks in the veneer where that appears to be normalizing, and more people are allowing themselves to see that their own precarity is something that they share in common with so many more people than they thought that they did.
And you said like an alternative vision. I guess I want to emphasize again, like our vision of the world, of organizing the world, is here, and we're already doing it. We're always already doing it, and we're doing it really well right now in the face of this horrible thing. And like that, I think is in the end is what is gonna like touch people, is to see that like this is happening. The like capitalist horrorscape isn't the only thing. Right, that's on top or adjacent to or whatever, hiding a lot of the work that we are doing all the time. Whether you call yourself an anarchist or not, people are always doing this like mutual aid stuff.
And not just anarchists. Like Eddie, like one of the questions that you mentioned earlier is like, how does the role of community identity function in the context of doing pandemic response and mutual aid relief? And like one of the things that we're seeing is like the generalization of those community-based skills or those community maintaining skills of like checking in with people, providing various forms of care to people without like bringing money into it. Actually, a great example, I got the norovirus just a couple days before the shelter-in-place order was going to go into effect. And I was terrified. Like, I knew I didn't have the COVID, but it was a really scary moment for me. And then the Monday morning after that, when I was starting to feel a little bit better, I coughed so hard that I threw out my back. And I'm only 36. I was really embarrassed. So like, a friend of mine who does massage therapy work reached out to me and like didn't want any money, just like asked if I could help them with gas a little bit to get over here. And then they worked on me and gave me some tips on how to like change my posture. And like, I'm feeling so much better now. My knee pain is gone and everything. So what I'm seeing is like just the intense power of community, not just at some larger abstract level to organize something like a citywide rent strike, but to like materially change people's lives in the here and now. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, on the topic of burnout too, like in terms of organizing, that just made me think of that. Like, this is one of the situations, like one of the pressing conflicts that we're responding to, kind of organizing situations where I've seen people check in the most and also be like really willing to say their limitations unabashedly and get like a really positive response from it. It's not like this like like militant Protestant ethics stuff. People are like, yo, listen, I gotta bow out of this conversation right now because like I'm not in the place for it. And everyone's like, cool, you take care of yourself. And so that's really great. Like, people are able to announce their boundaries and still be able to come in and out of the work because there's so many people doing it together.
To hear that is really inspiring, because I know that like on a regular basis outside of this sort of situation, I've experienced it, but I've seen so many people just burn themselves out by running and getting the savior complex going, and just thinking that if like they don't do it, that no one else is going to, and that they are literally going to save the world if they can just keep running fast enough.
On that note, an organizer friend of mine named Maddie from Southern Maryland, who has been involved with the Industrial Workers of the World, as have I, used to tell us when I lived up in the DC area, you have two hands. Each thing you're doing as an organizer goes in one hand. If you need a free hand, you have to put something down. If you have more than two things, you definitely have to put something down. And it's like the limitations that are placed upon us in terms of our ability to like, we're all stressed out and we're all trying not to get sick, etc. It means that we kind of have to respect our own limitations maybe a little bit more than before. And I think that that's like reflective of a healthier trend of community building among organizing circles that I've started seeing in the last, I would say, like 3 to 5 years especially.
And that actually like brings up an issue that we haven't spoken about, and I think is actually important to mention, is that we're going to start seeing more people affected by COVID, right? Like right now in Asheville, it's growing, but it's not the hot spot in North Carolina. It's not like a big place where there's a lot of activity, but it's going to grow, right? So that's going to change our organizing. It's going to change the relation people have to their leases and their bills. And it's also going to change the capacity of our people who are like on the street delivering resources to people, right? Like, people are putting themselves at risk. So I mean, I can't predict exactly how that's going to be, but that's another reason why I think we have to be able to tag in and out, and like be very clear on what we can do and what we can't do, because we're going to have to start taking care of each other while we're sick.
Do you have any suggestions on how we can take the momentum that's been going now, and like you said, like not burning out and trying to stay this in the long run, but not allowing the tension that we're existing in right now and like the relationships that we're building right now to sort of elastically bend back to what they were, if that is even possible, prior to the pandemic coming through, so that we can take these like this push towards, well, damn it, we need a rent freeze, to actually we're forming neighborhood councils and of tenants, and we're going to be doing round robin like rent, like months without rent for this building or this block, or like how do we build capacity and keep it after like the main like wave of COVID has passed?
I mean, I think that like, first, to answer your question, I don't think things can go back to the way they were before. It'll just like make us irrelevant, and then things will be terrible. Not just because like us organizers will feel left out. It's not like that at all. I'm just saying like we have a responsibility to the community to try to use our skills as best we can and as forward thinkingly as we can Like, they say to flatten the curve, and we might be beyond the point where flattening the curve, quote unquote, is actually still possible. But I mean, we can certainly, there's still a lot we can do. And I think over time, people are going to have to basically, like, to get a little Marxian, like, a periphery of people who are involved in, like, rent strike stuff are going, like, probably by May Day will find themselves with the opportunity to choose to get more deeply involved or pull away. And so it's up to us to make the case that they need to get more deeply involved, not for us, but for themselves, just out of, like, pure solidarity. We want people to be able to take over control of their own lives. That's what we're fighting for.
Like, I agree, things aren't going to go back to normal. I'm like every day trying to think, like, what is it going to look like, and trying not to think in a binary way of, like, everything I hate about this world will come crashing down and we'll build the better world, or we'll end up in a totalitarian fascist dictatorship. So it's, like, hard to know exactly what it's going to look like, but it's not going to be the same. And the place where I'm laying my hope is, like, the continual demand from the state and the system for the poor people to be paying in and giving up their livelihood is going to just become so brazenly unacceptable by the mass of people that, like, that's where the change will end up, like, coming from. That this contradiction of the pandemic is going to turn. I don't know why I keep using the contradiction. I'm using these, like, Maoist terms or whatever.
No, I'm into it.
Yeah, like, these people are going to be like, we need to live, right? And that we can't live this way, and we're not going to do it anymore. There's going to be a point of refusal, right. I think, or I hope at least, because I don't want to see the system reestablish itself with any more assurance of its, like, ability to withstand crisis and all these things that are going to just get more and more frequent.
Well, to get even more Maoist/Marxist in the conversation, I mean, as the world economy is going to have to change, or it's just going to keep collapsing. I mean, we've already been saying that about capitalism for hundreds of years now, but I mean, like, really specifically right now, like, we're seeing that, like, the so-called marketplace, the free market, cannot survive without constant direct state intervention to keep people going to work and to keep stores stocked and making a profit. And like what Scott was talking about, like, when people start to refuse work, like, I've already encountered a few friends who started talking, quote unquote, jokingly, to kind of feel each other out about, hey, we should start that gardening commune, or hey, we should find some land to squat, or like, God damn, I could never go back to work after this. And, like, the more that people manage to find ways to make themselves more self-sufficient, I'm not talking about in absolute terms, but, like, if people even just start producing or being able to acquire, like, for example, half the food they need a month without having to use money or, like, the industrial food system, then that'll be a step forward for people's, like, well-being and their ability to provide for themselves. And most importantly, one another.
And now that you say that, I think that might be one of the big turning points, because so many people are turning to, like, gardening and producing their own food. And if more and more people are able to gain a higher level of, like, subsistence from the food that's being produced within our cities, even, that I think that'll just be, like, astonishing for people,
Mm-hmm.
We didn't really talk about squatting very much. Like, is involved in breaking any squats?
Not at this time. We've actually,
what are you saying?
What I'm saying is that, like, that's definitely within what one might call the anarchist playbook. And, like, actually, I'll focus on, so there was recently a physical eviction resistance in Richmond, Virginia, go Richmond, that was carried out by some women of color wearing personal protective equipment, PPE, in order to maintain, like, proper hygiene while confronting these police officers who were trying to evict someone who lived there. And it's like, that's the kind of thing, I mean, I figured physically fighting evictions is right in the same immediate, like, zone as thinking about squatting. And to tie it back to people starting to produce for themselves a bit more, like, yeah, people are going to be finding ways to grow things. Whatever that looks like, however they manage to feed themselves, they're going to do it. And like on the 8th, what was that, Wednesday? There's going to be an online class on Facebook from somebody up in DC who's going to be talking about landless gardening for people who either don't have homes or who rent and don't have any actual like physical turf that they could plant stuff in. So we're looking at people get really creative all of a sudden with finding ways to help each other support themselves.
And even like before the pandemic, there was the Moms for Housing in Oakland who squatted a house, and I mean they sort of used the nonviolent media sort of playbook of, you know, getting it on tape that the militarized police are trying to evict these black mothers with their children to turn the tide for them. But that's like within our immediate history, so stuff like that would have to be considered, you know, given as this crisis increases and people are becoming more desperate for shelter and the things they need, that we've seen this like recently work. You know, we can assess that situation on its own, but like those women end up being housed for now, at least.
With so many hotels and motels and other places for like relatively well-to-do travelers to stay here in Asheville, like there's got to be a critical point beyond which people just decide, you know what? Those rooms in that building are empty. Someone should live in them. And then somebody will try to make that happen. And like, that's not something that's necessarily on our immediate horizon, but we're trying to not, you know, rule out anything that we might have to consider in order to make sure that people survive. Like, we've been having conversations with a lot of people about, like, you know, one of the demands of our movement aimed at like county and state and even to some extent national government is like, we need to get the prisoners out of the prisons. Like, people are talking about furloughing, people are talking about like considering nonviolent prisoners or those that are most vulnerable. But then you hear about a place like Rikers Island up in New York where, like, on Democracy Now! Today, they were interviewing somebody who just got released saying it's basically like a plague ward. Like, everybody's sick and there's no PPE to go around, and there's even less cleaning solution than usual available to the prisoners. So at this point, it's kind of like all the different like structures of our like commercial police state society are just like becoming, what's the word? Not irrelevant, but like very much roadblocks to what needs to be happening, at least like on a humanitarian level. You know, like, not only were we arguing for decades that we need to abolish prisons in the U.S., now there's suddenly a really high sense of urgency of getting imprison people physically out of the jails and prisons, because otherwise they might die. And people who are like, well, if they're murderers, then fuck them. It's like, well, the easy argument to that is, okay, but does every single person who's in jail for anything deserve death for that? And like, you're going to hear some people say yes, but most people yell, no, of course not. And I think the tide could start to shift on that.
Yeah, I guess it might be important to mention that like our branch of organizing is in relation to like trying to bring together all these different struggles, including the abolition one that you just mentioned. But I also just wanted to say, like, in terms of the question that you asked first, the main thing we really want to focus on around the tenant organizing is like having people's back. So like, people aren't acting, whether that's not paying rent, whether that's squatting, they're not acting without support, community support. And I don't know exactly what that will look like, you know, in the concrete, but we're here and we want people to like reach out to us, and we want to get people's back, whether that's like legal advice or showing up in our PPE to stop an eviction.
Well, that's a perfect opportunity for me to ask how people can find out more about Uh-Oh and potentially get involved or get assistance from y'all.
There's a Facebook page. It's Unemployed Humans Organizing Help Asheville. There's also an Instagram that's UHOH_AVL, and then an email address that's UHOHAVL@riseup.net. So those are 3 points of contact.
And then to add 2 more points of side contact or points of overlap, the Asheville Solidarity Network Facebook page has a lot of crossover between folks doing that and folks doing organizing. And to some extent, the same goes for Asheville Survival Program Facebook page. So like, between these 3, we've been like really managing to send a message pretty far and wide lately. So any of those places are great to check us out.
Cool. Well, thank you both so much. And Sadie and Scott, so much good luck and solidarity.
Thanks for giving us the time to talk.
Yeah, of course. And health. A great way of supporting us is to give us a contact. Let us know that you appreciate our work. Our 10th anniversary of this project is right around the corner in the beginning of May, and it would be lovely to get some more messages of just memories or thoughts that you have occurring around this project. If there was an interview that specifically touched you or sparked an idea and sent you down a train, an artist that we happen to play on the show, or anything of that sort. You can also leave us a signal voice message if you want to at Nation Code 1, area code 828-571-0161. There's a link in our show notes for this. Or you can send an email with a link to an audio file that you record or a picture or whatever to the Final Straw Radio at riseup.net or the Final Straw Radio at protonmail.com. This is The Final Straw, and I'm Bursa Goodness. This show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw Radio, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned co-op in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a catalog of Firestorm's books and zines, plus a full calendar of events up at their website, firestorm.coop.